Justice Juan Merchan has to send Trump to Rikers Island for violating the gag order, or he is going to lose control of this trial. After what happened yesterday, Merchan has to jail Trump. He has to. Trump tried to finesse the gag order by quoting somebody else, that worm Waters from Fox, quoting somebody else denigrating the jurors and the judge and adding to the pile of stochastic inducements to violence against anyone who thwarts Trump here or anywhere else. And by morning, one of the jurors, the silhouette of their name and the vague depiction of their home revealed, was quitting out of fear. Because what Trump sought by denigrating the jury works. Because Trump's intimidation works. Because Trump's terrorism works. He has to see the inside of a jail cell. I don't care if it's for life. I don't care if it's for 1 hour. Trump's conviction that he will break Merchan and break the New York State Supreme Court and break the American justice system must itself be broken now, or it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. It is Trump who must be broken. Prosecutors began day 3 of the trial yesterday by noting he had violated the gag order 7 different times just since jury selection began Monday, and they actually undersold the most egregious of Trump's crimes, with Joshua Steinglass saying, quote, the defendant reposted about liberals lying to try to get on the jury, a post by Jesse Waters. That was not a repost. Trump does dozens of reposts a day. You hit a repost icon, a couple of rounded arrows. Maybe you add a comment. Trump knows what a repost is. That is not what Trump or someone in control of the social media account bearing his name did. What Trump did was to make a new post quoting Waters. It read, it still reads, it's still live, quotation marks, they are catching undercover liberal activists lying to the judge in order to get on the Trump jury, end quotation marks. Jesse Waters. It is in Trump's own electronic hand. It is not a repost. It is not technically okay within the gag order because Trump isn't lying about the judge and the jurors and endangering them all. He's just quoting Jesse Waters lying about the judge and the jurors and endangering them all. Trump wrote that. It is Trump himself violating the gag order in that way. And the prosecution believes the other examples, posting articles about Michael Cohen on his social media feed at his campaign website, are also violations. And the longer we wait to break Trump, the less our ability to contain him will be. At this rate, it is just a matter of time until Trump has somebody on his team leak the name of a juror in this case and provoke another delay, more fear of retribution for the jurors who do not ask out, or maybe even a mistrial. Trump's team is working full-time, scouring the histories and the social media histories of those already on the jury. What do you think that is for? Trump is a wounded, cornered animal in a case of life or death. Think of him always as a cockroach with thumbs. And for good insulting measure, Trump also used his phone in court and took a call, also a violation of court rules everywhere. And he didn't stand when the jurors and prospective jurors came in, even though everybody else officially in court did so. And he muttered and gestured at the jurors on Tuesday. And he brought Jason Miller and his ex-wrestler thug Stephen Chung into court to lend a further air of intimidation. And he not only tried to intimidate the jurors and the potential jurors and the witnesses, he did intimidate them. One of them quit. And if you or I or anybody who is not Trump did any one of those things and repeatedly lied by promising we would stop, we would see the inside of a jail cell, and Trump must. Just for 1 hour, Justice Merchan. Just long enough for Trump to soil his pants. The other part of the standard Trump court practice did not go so well. The Trump post in which he quoted Waters also served, it seemed, to delay the court process, because nothing slows down a trial more than when, instead of filling up the jury pool, you start draining it. Before lunch, they were down from 7 seated jurors to 5, and by late afternoon, I heard an expert on CNN explain he'd always known the judge's statement on Tuesday that opening statements in the actual trial would be next Monday at 9:30 was impossible, and then an hour later, the judge announced they had seated the 12 jurors and 1 alternate, and were just 5 alternates shy of the complete set. So we likely will start on Monday morning, and then Tuesday comes the hearing on Trump violating the gag order. Again and again and again. Slightly wide range of possible outcomes at that hearing. For him, might be as little as $1,000 fine per offense. For you, it would be jail. The rest of it yesterday was mere detail, though some of it was funny or entertaining or stupid or all. There seemed to be consensus that for once Trump did not fall asleep, but one NBC analyst wrote that while Justice Merchan was giving instructions to the new crowd of 96 would-be jurors, quote, Trump rests his eyes. There was a reminder that, like finding a bunch of people in a large crowded room who share your birthday, is way easier than the math would at first suggest. There are coincidences. One of Trump's lawyers asked for a prospective juror to be dismissed for cause. Why? She and her husband had stayed at the lawyer's house 15 years ago. Oh, and the husband reviewed Maggie Haberman's book. Another would-be juror was born in Italy and immediately noted that there they compare Trump to the corrupt prime minister and media baron Silvio Berlusconi, an excellent comp. One of the jurors, also dismissed from the pool, gave Trump the most backhanded compliment imaginable. Quote, he looked less orange than I imagined. We had one post-courtroom unintentional revelation from Trump that he is, as has been speculated, panicking, both over this case and the sudden reversal of the polling winds. The first thing Trump did after leaving 100 Center Street yesterday was to post a graphic on his social media feed reading, Trump dominates Biden in new national poll, along with the numbers and the bar graphs. What were the numbers? Trump 46, Biden 43. Lead is 3 points. Margin of error is 2.7 points. When the word Trump uses for an outlier poll with an effective lead of 0.3% is dominates, he's panicking. And after the day ended, we had 2 more reminders that occasionally it is impossible to believe that Trump is actually smart enough, actually ever made enough money, despite his stupidity, to ensure that he did not starve to death, let alone last long enough to take over the government. To prove his innocence, he marched out of court and held in his hands a stack of right-wing media bleatings, insisting on his martyrdom. It looked like a small telephone book. Printed out computer stories. At one point, he read off the names of the authors, Greg Jarrett, Andrew McCarthy, Jonathan Turley, as if these names do not provoke laughter from at least as many Americans as they would impress. Jonathan Turley? I mean, Trump, why not Kanye West? He also said the stories were just from the last few days, while at least one printout was done in such a large font that reporters could tell the story was, in fact, from 2023. And lastly, the world's toughest man, the symbol of masculinity for MAGA millions, the man who is going through all this for America and for you, a greater martyr than Abraham Lincoln. That Superman is really cold.
I'm sitting here for days now, from morning till night, in that freezing room, freezing. Everybody was freezing in
Okay, I got 2 for this one. 1? Trump, it's that cold, so you won't freaking fall asleep again, moron. And 2, don't worry, defendant J. Trump. It'll be much warmer in hell. All right, let's run some of the other headlines. This is what Congress is like at the moment, in case you didn't know. For a time yesterday, the controversy was not about whether or not a Republican congressman had called another Republican congressman, quote, tubby in an argument. It was about which congressman the first congressman had called tubby. NBC News quoted 2 sources saying that during a heated argument in the House about the upcoming foreign aid bills, Derek Van Orden of Wisconsin, the whirling dervish of the House, had called the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. I mean, he's still the Speaker. We'll see about next week. Van Orden had called Speaker Mike Johnson tubby. Van Orden has all kinds of problems, but one thing Johnson is not is tubby. And Van Orden was outraged by this report because he didn't call Johnson tubby. He called Matt Gaetz tubby. That, he said, was directed directly at Matt Gaetz. Directed directly? Anything further, Father? He felt like he should call me a squish. And I wanted to remind anybody who has not been in combat and held his friend's hand as they died being shot by the enemy really doesn't have any business calling someone else a squish. And so, in fact, I did call him tubby, and I stand by that. As difficult as it is to criticize anybody who would call Matt Gaetz anything, particularly tubby, Van Orden is nuts. He was seen at the January 6th coup attempt. He was heard telling Robert Reich, who spells his name R-E-I-C-H, but pronounces it Reich, telling Robert Reich that he should change his first name to Third, leaving millions confused. What the hell's the Third Reich? He was seen swearing at and threatening a bunch of teenage Senate pages because they were lying on the floor taking pictures on their last day, defiling his house. He reportedly was heard swearing at a bunch of briefers from the White House who were updating a large group of congressmen about Israel. The last time I had him on this show, he was heard claiming that Senator Warren makes $700,000 a month. Those Senate pay raises have gotten out of hand. When the Democratic Congressman Dean Phillips of Minnesota, who is Jewish, and we remember him from his ill-fated, career-ending attempt to unseat President Biden, when Phillips heard about this remark about the briefers from the White House about Israel, he replied, "Shame on you," to Van Orden, and Van Orden promptly dropped an F-bomb on him. And then there is this thing again, this automatic reverting to, I served in the military, therefore I am a god. I mean, listen to this again. I wanted to remind anybody who has not been in combat and held his friend's hand as they died being shot by the enemy really doesn't have any business calling someone else a squish. My God, what did we start doing this for? Electing people who were in the military at a time when it appears that merely holding one of our weapons and firing it can cause brain damage. Why are we electing these people to Congress? Because they're louder than everybody else? I served in the military, therefore I am a human deity. Mr. Van Orden, it looks like all you got in the military was PTSD. I mean, I know the House has this great multi-century tradition of having sent one of its members physically into the Senate to try to beat a senator to death, Senator Charles Sumner. And the congressman was Preston Brooks, and he used his cane, and it was several minutes, and Sumner was already seriously brain damaged by the time anybody pulled him off Sumner. And the response from his home constituents when they found out that he broke his cane on Senator Sumner was to send him more canes. But the stupidity of this Congress of 2024 burns. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has responded to almost everything in some really stupid way that suggests maybe she was in the service too and got PTSD and has forgotten her entire service because she doesn't make a point of it. Marjorie Taylor Greene responded to the Ukraine funding bill to be voted on tomorrow, Saturday, with an amendment that would make anybody who votes for Ukraine aid conscripted into the Ukrainian army. Somehow I don't think that was going to be adopted or is possibly legal. Then Congressman Norman and Congressman Perry and Congressman Biggs, they offered a Ukraine amendment. It would delete line 1 of the Ukraine funding bill and all that follows. Quote, all that follows. In other words, the amendment would eliminate everything in the Ukraine funding bill. Now, on the other hand, there is a slight ray of hope. We already know about what Jamie Raskin can do to Congressman Comer, which is almost worth the price of this nonstop performative act in which they pretend to impeach people. It's almost worth it. But maybe the bright light of this House, maybe the bright light of this Congress is Jared Moskowitz of Florida, because he responded to Marge Greene's amendment about conscription in the Ukraine army, like she could spell army. Moskowitz offered amendment to this, renaming Cannon House Office Building Room 403 the Neville Chamberlain Room. Who occupies room 403 in the Cannon House Office? Oh, it's Congresswoman Greene of Georgia. That's a coincidence. Wait a minute. Moskowitz was busy yesterday. Another amendment urging that Congresswoman Greene, quote, should be appointed Vladimir Putin's special envoy to the United States Congress. We need an official Democratic House troll. I nominate Jared Moskowitz. To paraphrase Groucho Marx, okay, Mr. Moskowitz. And there is hope coming in a bipartisan fashion in the House, coming from the other side, from Sean Davis, CEO of The Federalist, former executive at the Daily Caller, economic policy advisor to the dumbest man ever to serve, Rick Perry, and somebody who blocked me on Twitter, I don't know how long ago. He has the greatest idea ever. The greatest idea ever. The most effective burn against the liberals. The most damaging thing to the Democratic Party. And I think we need to tell Mr. Davis. I think we all need to go on Twitter, those of you who have not been blocked by him, need to go on to Twitter and say, Sean Davis. I believe he's Sean M. Dav, because he ran out of planning. I don't know what. He didn't write Sean Davis or S.M. Davis. He wrote Sean M. Dev. You need to tell him not to do this because it would be so damaging to the Democratic Party. It would destroy Joe Biden's chances of re-election. This is what he wrote. Sean Davis, CEO of The Federalist, one of the great intellects on the right. The 4 smarter people on the right are all 7 years old. If 4 Republicans, writes Sean Davis, were to resign from Congress in protest of Mike Johnson's indefensible betrayal of the country and her borders, it would deadlock the House 213 to 213, lead to Mike Johnson's ouster, prevent the election of a new speaker, prevent new members from being sworn in following special elections, and also prevent any more Biden priorities from being enacted this Congress, including Ukraine. It would be the ultimate nuclear option in response to Johnson's threats to punish Republicans who refuse to bless his border betrayal. Yes. Do this. I can't tell you how much damage it would do to me. I am so impressed by this idea, Mr. Davis. You must push for this. You must. You heard it. This far-right fascist MAGA Republican wants enough Republican congressmen to resign to own the libs by giving up the Republican majority. You know, Sean Davis, there's an even better plan. And truly, this would hurt us on the left. Those of us who consider ourselves Democrats or liberals or communists. By the way, years ago at a high school reunion, I had a friend of mine who I'd known since 1967 come up to me and go, "I'm offended that they call you a communist." I said, "Why?" He goes, "I'm an actual communist. I'm a labor organizer in San Francisco. You're not a communist." Sean Davis, this would destroy all of us on the left. Many of us would actually vaporize, self-vaporize. We'd turn into a pile of salt like Lot's wife. Yes, I made a biblical reference. Now you can turn into a pile of salt, Sean Davis. But here's the better plan. You're not thinking big enough. 4 resignations to deadlock the House at 213 all. That's not big enough to own the libs. Giving up the majority, well, that's not enough. This other idea I have would hurt us so much. I am probably going to be thrown out of the communist, socialist, liberal plot to destroy America. I will have my membership card withdrawn, and they will not even refund my $12 annual dues. I will be destroyed for saying this, but say it, I must. 4 resignations from Congress? No. 5 Republican congressmen must resign. Sean Davis, 5. Think big, be big, my friend. Give up their majority to own the libs. Again, sometimes you wonder, but I'll go back to my cliche of cliches. The democracy is not preserved by the efforts of those of us who are hoping to preserve it. It is preserved by the stupidity of those who would destroy it. Sure, give up the leadership. Yeah, resign. Absolutely. Couple of more headlines, and they are, of course, about political violence. You probably heard about the Kennedy family en masse endorsing Joe Biden yesterday rather than Robert F. Jr., who is nuts. Well, it was quite a press conference because 54,000 members of the Kennedy family, as you know, practicing Catholics, and boy, do they practice a lot, 54,000 members of the Kennedy family endorsed Biden yesterday and said, yeah, Bob Jr.'s out of his mind. But this was more interesting. Nicole Shanahan, who is the vice president on the RFK Jr. crazy train ticket, the day before her appointment, RFK Jr.'s campaign got a $2 million donation from Nicole Shanahan. Nicole Shanahan? Why, that's Nicole Shanahan's name. What an amazing coincidence. There is a reason to believe that apart from the $2 million, Kennedy chose her because she is the only rich person in America crazier than he is. Quoting the Midas Network, since becoming RFK Jr.'s running mate, Nicole Shanahan has liked a tweet depicting herself and her running mate unleashing violence on their political opponents. In the Matrix-style video, Shanahan can be seen striking President Joe Biden, while RFK Jr. fires an automatic weapon, shooting Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren before kicking Trump in the head. Yes, I know, it's political violence, and we should not publicize nor glorify it. But on the other hand, to be optimistic, and I'm, as you know, a glass-half-full guy, I'll just point out that at least this political violence is bipartisan. Kicker, punchline, who posted the video that Nicole Shanahan liked in which Shanahan strikes Biden and RFK Jr. Kicks Trump in the head and shoots Liz Warren? Who posted this video? The Midas Group did some digging and says it's a guy who claims to be a national security advisor to RFK Jr. Once again, it's the campaign for the people who are too crazy even for Trump. And speaking of which, there's Kari Lake. And we close our jaunty, breezy review of the other headlines today with this from Kari Lake. Campaign speech in Arizona. I have been debating the whole time since I first read this early in this week how to present this and whether or not to do the joke. And I've decided, yes, I have to do the joke. She said, Trump is willing to sacrifice everything I am. That's why they're coming after us with lawfare. This is the fired weather woman from a station in Phoenix. That's why they're coming after us with lawfare. They're going to come after us with everything. She's never won an election. Never came close. Running for Senate. Makes Kyrsten Sinema look good as a candidate. That's why the next 6 months is going to be intense, and we need to strap on our... Let's see, she said. What do we want to strap on? We're going to strap on our seatbelt. We're going to put on our helmet or your Carrie Lake ball cap. We're going to put on the armor of God and maybe strap on a Glock on the side of us just in case. I hate to say this, but my God, even for somebody running as a Republican for the U.S. Senate, this person is spending an extraordinary and an inordinate amount of time saying the words strap on. Also of interest here, history does not repeat itself, Carrie Lake, but it does rhyme, Twain said. Yeah, what did Twain know? Sometimes it does repeat itself. The ex-MSNBC host fired for homophobic comments about a reporter that he made live on his 2005 show that only lasted 2 episodes is now fired by an arm of the campaign of New York Mayor Eric Adams for homophobic comments about a reporter. Yes, it's happened. Worst Persons in the World has gone into reruns. That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Still ahead of us on this edition of Countdown, we will close out the week with a dog you can help and the story of another dog who was alive when Teddy Roosevelt was president, yet who you will recognize immediately. Muggs is one dog from 150 dog generations ago, and yet he's all dogs. His humans defended him to the last, even though Muggs was James Thurber's The Dog That Bit People. Coming up first, still more new idiots to talk about, and at length. These are some special contenders in the daily roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens, including the NYPD mugging decoy and the guy on the all-pudding diet, among those who constitute today's worst persons in the world. The bronze, worse, Clay Travis. Ex-lawyer, ex-sports writer, now branching out and soon to be ex-political commentator. And guess what? He sucks at all of it. I can tell you from personal experience, the conversion from sports to politics is tougher than it looks, but it ain't this tough. He co-hosts a podcast with an ex-cop with one of those Stephen King hair problems, where his hair grows like a werewolf. I think the name is Bunk Sex Bump. Buck Sex Bunk Bump. Anyway, his hair keeps growing further and further down his forehead. Every new picture of him, the hairline is a little lower. He must have to shave it twice an hour, or it's going to grow off his body and take over the world. Anyway, so it's the Clay Travis and Bunk Sex Bump show, and on it, surprise, surprise, Clay Travis, a little fascist, attacked women's basketball and the WNBA, and the attention being paid to the college star turning pro Caitlin Clark, and the shock that her salary will be $75,000. Although she's got an 8-figure endorsement deal, so she's not going to be, in need of shoes, figuratively or literally. This is what he said. The revenue produced by the NBA is $10 billion a year. The revenue produced by the WNBA is around $60 million. And if you actually do the math as a percentage of revenue, WNBA players actually make more than NBA players. Just nobody cares about their profession, unquote. So this goes on for a while, and it's, textbook for the right attack on women's sports, particularly as it grows, and the right's attack on women in general. Of course, women should not be paid as much as men in sports. They're women. Of course, women should not be paid as much as men not in sports. They're women. Of course, women should not have the vote or rights. They're women. Of course, they should wear Handmaid's Tale costumes. They're women. On the other hand, in December 2021, when a mediocre college swimmer named Gaines began to complain that a transgender woman named Leah Thomas was winning college swimming races, Clay Travis went on Fox, News, unquote, and announced that Thomas, quote, threatens to destroy all of women's sports. That's the very sanctity of the sporting universe. Travis self-righteously continued, where we believe in a meritocracy, the best man or woman wins. So in one case, this Travis idiot cares about the sanctity of women's sports. And in this case, he says nobody cares about the sanctity of women's sports or anything about women's sports, even though the NCAA Women's Championship game had more TV viewers this year than did the men's championship game. It must be nice for Travis to be so simple-minded that he can turn his ethics on and off like that, to defend women's sports and then to utterly dismiss women's sports. But wait, there's more. Travis was not done bickling. I asked this question, and I bet the answer is no. Can you think of any business that has existed for 25 years? By the way, I've left out his moron Southern accent. Can you think of any business that has existed for 25 years and never made a profit and still exists? The fact that the WNBA exists at all is a testament in many ways to, well, the government, I guess you could say, unquote. Clay Travis never explains how the government made the WNBA happen, probably because there's no explanation. It's nonsense. But his rhetorical question has a real answer about any business that has existed for 25 years and never made a profit. And he clearly does not know it. There was a sports league founded in 1946, and at one point it had grown to 24 teams. But it was so unsuccessful over its first 2 decades, its first 20 years, so not 25, but close enough, that in that time, literally 17 of its franchises went bankrupt. 2 of them went bankrupt in the middle of the season. How's Baltimore doing? They went out of business. Oh. It had 3 different teams in Chicago. Each of them failed. 3 in Indianapolis. And by 1966, this league was down to just 9 teams. And the league had never made any money, and it even stopped bleeding cash in the late 60s to expand a little. But its championship games were still only shown on television on tape delay at 11:30 at night in its 25th year. And that league that was a complete failure for its first 25 years was the National Basketball Association, the NBA, the Men's National Basketball Association. Well, what would this guy Travis know about the history of American sports leagues? His idea of sports is 20 years ago when he couldn't see NFL games on his TV in the Virgin Islands, he went on a hunger strike demanding that they make them available to him there. No, not a hunger strike, a pudding strike. For 50 days, Clay Travis ate nothing but pudding, something from which he has clearly yet to recover. The runner-up, worser, the Republican Party of Charlotte, North Carolina, could be run by Clay Travis. I'm not sure. Somebody claiming to be a first-time history teacher posted what they mockingly pretended was a paper about the Battle of Gettysburg. Teaching my first history course this semester has been rewarding, but I don't know what to do with this student, they wrote, and the paper, a photograph was provided of it, began, quote, our Union was saved by the immortal heroes at Gettysburg. Gettysburg, what an unbelievable battle that was. The Battle of Gettysburg, what an unbelievable, it was so much and so interesting and so vicious and so beautiful in so many different ways. Gettysburg, wow. The paper is, of course, littered with red marks and notes from the teacher. I count 12, and it's only one paragraph. Of course, it's not an actual school paper about Gettysburg. It was a transcript of Trump trying to speak normally and trying to express whatever little he remembered from studying Gettysburg in, 1961. This is where the idiots from the Charlotte Republican Party come in. They replied to that tweet with, quote, "That's probably from a student in Charlotte Mecklenburg schools led by your Mecklenburg Democrats. That totally tracks. We can't read or spell or add or locate countries on grade level, but we can make sure your feelings aren't hurt during social and emotional learning." Well, yes, somebody here didn't learn how to read. The photo of the paper literally has Trump's name typed in the upper left-hand corner next to the big red F. The Charlotte Republican Party, whoever handles their Twitter account, didn't notice, hasn't noticed. The reply is still live. Maybe Trump won't find out how the Charlotte Republican Party has dissed him. But our winner, the worst, Bo Dietl. Bo Dietl, D-I-E-T-L, is the former World Trade Center iron worker, New York City cop, New York City detective, failed congressional candidate, failed mayoralty candidate, failed radio host, failed TV host, security consultant, and frequent guest on the Don Imus show, The Years of Deterioration. Bo Dietl also has a problem. He's not just a homophobe. There are lots of homophobes. He's a homophobe who has to express it by insisting he's not homophobic towards people who he then calls really unfortunate names. And it's happened again. The Legal Defense Fund for New York Mayor Eric Adams. That's a whole different story. I only have infinity here. I don't have time for the Eric Adams Legal Defense Fund story. Anyway, the Eric Adams Legal Defense Fund hired Bo Dietl's company to vet donors. It has now fired Bo Dietl's company to vet donors because first, when the New York Daily News reported that the Eric Adams Defense Fund had paid Bo Dietl and his company $13,000, Bo Dietl responded to the paper's request for comment by saying, quote, "I wouldn't effing tell you any effing thing." Bad, but again, we're in New York. Priests talk like that. But then Politico called for comment about the story, and Dietl told that guy, quote, "Why don't you do me a favor? Go suck somebody's blank, because I don't want to talk to you, okay? You like to suck blank? Go suck blank somewhere." Fired 2 hours later. A few of us who are alive still to remember, who are like Ishmael at the end of Moby Dick, those of us left alive to tell thee. We saw this story, we laughed, we cried, we shuddered. On Friday, April 8th, 2005, at 4 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, there premiered on MSNBC at the behest of the new network president Rick Kaplan, a little show called Dietl and Daniels. It was one of Kaplan's many show ideas that got launched because he liked the title of the show. He wanted me to co-host with Tucker Carlson, because then he could have called a show TKO. You get it? That's how he made his decisions. Here, in Dietl and Daniels, he also saw some of the content. He saw a contrasting buddy show. Lisa Daniels was a magna cum laude graduate of Harvard Law who preferred television and was very good at anchoring it, smart, yet, as they say in TV circles, accessible. And Bo Dietl was a go suck somebody's blank guy. So I can't remember if it was the premiere episode of Dietl and Daniels on MSNBC or the farewell episode 2 weeks later. There were only the 2 episodes. But one of the guests was a man named James Guckert, who was, at a couple of steps removed, hired by the Bush administration to portray a character named Jeff Gannon, who would get White House press credentials for a made-up news website called Talon News, and he would go to Bush's press secretary's press conferences and ask tough questions like, is George Bush the greatest president ever or the greatest American ever? And do liberals like Osama bin Laden or do they love Osama bin Laden? I'm not exaggerating by very much here. Well, it soon turned out that Jeff Gannon was actually James Guckert, former nude model and male escort. Although he had been editor of his high school newspaper, must have been some newspaper. So this is 2005, and he was basically the prototype for the entirety of today's right-wing media and streaming shows. I mean, think about it. Fake website, fake name, connected to the people he's covering, and he has a whole sort of sordid history that he thinks nobody's ever going to notice, even though there are pictures of him naked with other... Okay, anyway. Anywho, Deedle and Daniels had Mr. Guckert and or Gannon on. I think it was supposed to be half the show, half an hour, or it was supposed to be half an hour, except Bo Deedle got kind of sidetracked during the introduction. So, he started, I got no problem with you being a... And I'm going to quote him here word for word, because the words themselves are not obscenities, just the implication here. So brace for impact here. Quoting Bo Deedle, premiere, I think, of Deedle and Daniels. Quote, I got no problem with you being a fudge packer. Honestly, I don't remember what happened after that. They did take Deedle and Daniels off the air for a week to retool it, although they left Deedle on as chief tool. I do remember Lisa Daniels, a truly lovely person in all aspects of that word, coming into my office either before or after what turned out to be the farewell episode of Deedle and Daniels and bursting into tears. And I said, you've substituted on the early morning news on the big network. They love you here. Go call the president of NBC News, who hired you, and explain to him this is making you burst into tears in Olbermann's office. So she did, and the next thing you knew, she had been plucked out of MSNBC, and they let her go work in 30 Rock, and they made her an NBC News correspondent, and then like a year later, still haunted by Bo Deedle, she left the business. She didn't even go back into lawyering. I can't find anything further about her more recently than from 2014, when she wrote a piece for Huffington Post about quitting television and going home and having 4 kids. 4 kids, good for her. Anyway, that's what Lisa Daniels learned in the years since 2005. What has Bo Deedle learned? Well, not to say fudge packer on TV, just to ask about sucking to a reporter. Bo, did I mention that he proudly tells people that when he was a cop, his specialty was to be a decoy for violent crime, so he was mugged more than 500 times and he had 30 line of duty injuries, and I'm just thinking maybe this made a bad situation worse? Deedle, today's worst person in the world! Just ahead on this edition of Countdown, Fridays with Thurber. Since I got good news about my pups this week, let's finish the week helping another dog and then hearing Thurber's epic biography of a pup, The Dog That Bit People. As mentioned, first, a dog in need you can help. Every dog has its day. This is about Snowy, and Snowy is maybe a big-ish Maltese or a Havanese or a Bichon or some kind of mix with that big Maltese-like smile. She was rushed to the ER at the end of last month with pancreatitis and ketoacidosis. It was touch and go. She needed 3 different IVs and 24-hour care. Because she's a rescue, she's about 8, she has diabetes. She was in there for a couple of weeks. Well, she's doing marvelously now. She's home, but she'll have to be tested all the time for a recurrence of the pancreatitis. And here's the problem. The total bill is $34,000. Now, Snowy's people don't want us to cover the entirety of the $34,000, but anything will help. I put in $500. If you have $5, I'll tweet out the link, or you can just go to GoFundMe and search for Snowy with an I-E, S-N-O-W-I-E, and she'll be the first one to pop up among the results. If you can't donate, just a retweet can help. And as I always say, Snowy thanks you, and I thank you. To the number 1 story on the Countdown and Fridays with Thurber, and it's amazing to me in retrospect how I read all of his wonderful realistic, not goopy writing about dogs, and enjoyed it thoroughly years before I was ever adopted by a dog. Now, reading his dog stories and anecdotes is like reading about a bunch of friends, even that one surly friend for whom we must continuously make excuses. The Dog That Bit People by James Thurber. Probably no one man should have as many dogs in this life as I have had, but there was more pleasure than distress in them for me, except in the case of an Airedale named Muggs. He gave me more trouble than all the other 54 or 5 put together, although my moment of keenest embarrassment was the time a Scotch Terrier named Jeannie, who had just had 6 puppies in the clothes closet of a 4th-floor apartment in New York, had the unexpected 7th and last at the corner of 11th Street and 5th Avenue during a walk she had insisted on taking. Then, too, there was the prize-winning French poodle, a giant big black poodle, none of your little untroublesome white miniatures, who got sick riding in the rumble seat of a car with me on her way to the Greenwich Dog Show. She had a red rubber bib tucked around her throat, and since a rainstorm came up when we were halfway through the Bronx, I had to hold over her a small green umbrella, really more of a parasol. The rain beat down fearfully, and suddenly the driver of the car drove into a big garage filled with mechanics. It happened so quickly that I forgot to put the umbrella down. And I will always remember with sickening distress the look of incredulity mixed with hatred that came over the face of the particular hardened garage man that came over to see what we wanted when he took a look at me and the poodle. All garage men and people of that intolerant stripe hate poodles with their curious haircuts, especially the pom-poms that you got to leave on their hips if you expect the dogs to win a prize. But the Airedale, as I have said, was the worst of all my dogs. He really wasn't my dog, matter of fact. I came home from a vacation one summer to find that my brother Roy had bought him while I was away. A big, burly, choleric dog. He always acted as if he thought I wasn't one of the family. There was a slight advantage in being one of the family, for he didn't bite the family as often as he bit strangers. Still, in the years that we had him, he bit everybody but Mother, and he made a pass at her once but missed. It was during the month when we suddenly had mice, and Muggs refused to do anything about them. Nobody ever had mice exactly like the mice we had that month. They acted like pet mice, almost like mice somebody had trained. They were so friendly that one night when Mother entertained at dinner the Freeralilas, a club she and my father had belonged to for 20 years, she put down a lot of little dishes with food in them on the pantry floor so that the mice would be satisfied with that and would not come into the dining room. Muggs stayed out in the pantry with the mice lying on the floor, growling to himself, not at the mice, but about all the people in the next room that he would have liked to get at. Mother slipped out into the pantry once to see how everything was going. Everything was going fine. It made her so mad to see Muggs lying there, oblivious of the mice. They came running up to her, that she slapped him. And he slashed at her but didn't make it. He was sorry immediately, Mother said. He was always sorry, she said, after he bit someone, but we could not understand how she figured this out. He didn't act sorry. Mother used to send a box of candy every Christmas to the people the Airedale bit. The list, finally, contained 40 or more names. Nobody could understand why we did not get rid of the dog. I didn't understand it very well myself, but we didn't get rid of him. I think that 1 or 2 people tried to poison Muggs. He acted poisoned once in a while, and old Major Moberly fired at him once with his service revolver near the Seneca Hotel in East Broad Street. But Muggs lived to almost 11 years old, and even when he could hardly get around, he bit a congressman who had called to see my father on business. My mother had never liked the congressman. She said the signs of his horoscope showed he couldn't be trusted. He was Saturn with the moon in Virgo. But she sent him a box of candy that Christmas anyway. He sent it right back, probably because he suspected it was trick candy. Mother persuaded herself that it was all for the best that the dog had bitten him, even though Father lost an important business association because of it. I wouldn't be associated with such a man, Mother said. Muggs could read him like a book. We used to take turns feeding Muggs to be on his good side, but that didn't always work. He was never in a very good humor even after a meal. Nobody knew exactly what was the matter with him, but whatever it was, it made him irascible, especially in the mornings. Roy, my brother, never felt very well in the morning either, especially before breakfast, and once when he came downstairs and found that Muggs had moodily chewed up the morning paper, he hit him in the face with a grapefruit and then jumped up on the dining room table, scattering dishes and silverware and spilling the coffee. Muggs' first free leap carried him all the way across the table and into a brass fire screen in front of the gas grate. But he was back on his feet in a moment, and in the end he got Roy and gave him a pretty vicious bite in the leg. Then he was all over it. He never bit anyone more than once at a time. Mother always mentioned that as an argument in his favor. She said he had a quick temper, but that he didn't hold a grudge. She was forever defending him. I think she liked him because he wasn't well. He's not strong, she would say pityingly. But that was inaccurate. He may not have been well, but he was terribly strong. One time my mother went to the Chittenden Hotel to call on a woman mental healer who was lecturing in Columbus on the subject of harmonious vibrations. She wanted to find out if it was possible to get harmonious vibrations into a dog. He's a large tan-colored Airedale, Mother explained. The woman said that she had never treated a dog, but she advised my mother to hold the thought that he did not bite and would not bite. Mother was holding the thought the very next morning when Muggs got the Iceman, but she blamed that slip-up on the Iceman. If you didn't think he would bite you, he wouldn't, Mother told him. He stomped out of the house in a terrible jangle of vibrations. One morning when Muggs bit me slightly, more or less in passing, I reached down and grabbed his short, stumpy tail and hoisted him into the air. It was a foolhardy thing to do, and the last time I saw my mother, about 6 months ago, she said she didn't know what possessed me. I don't either, except that I was pretty mad. As long as I held the dog off the floor by his tail, he couldn't get at me, but he twisted and jerked so, snarling all the time, that I realized I couldn't hold him that way very long. I carried him into the kitchen and flung him onto the floor and shut the door on him just as he crashed against it. But I forgot about the back stairs. Muggs went up the back stairs and down the front stairs and had me cornered in the living room. I managed to get up onto the mantelpiece above the fireplace, but it gave way and came down with a tremendous crash, throwing a large marble clock, several vases, and myself heavily to the floor. Muggs was so alarmed by the racket that when I picked myself up, he had disappeared. We couldn't find him anywhere, although we whistled and shouted, until old Mrs. Detweiler called after dinner that night. Muggs had bitten her once in the leg, and she came into the living room only after we assured her that Muggs had run away. She had just seated herself when, with great growling and scratching of claws, Muggs emerged from under a davenport where he had been quietly hiding all the time and bit her again. Mother examined the bite and put arnica on it and told Mrs. Detweiler that it was only a bruise. "He just bumped you," she said. But Mrs. Detweiler left our house in a nasty state of mind. Lots of people reported our Airedale to the police, but my father held a municipal office at the time and was on friendly terms with the police. Even so, the cops had been out a couple of times, once when Muggs bit Mrs. Rufus Sturdivant, and again when he bit Lieutenant Governor Malloy. But Mother told them it hadn't been Muggs's fault, but the fault of the people who were bitten. "When he starts for them, they scream," she explained, "and that excites him." The cops suggested that it might be a good idea to tie the dog up, but Mother said that it mortified him to be tied up and that he wouldn't eat when he was tied up. Muggs at his meals was an unusual sight because of the fact that if you reached toward the floor, he would bite you. We usually put his food plate on top of an old kitchen table with a bench alongside the table. Muggs would stand on the bench and eat. I remember that my mother's uncle Horatio, who boasted that he was the third man up Missionary Ridge, was splutteringly indignant when he found out that we fed the dog on a table because we were afraid to put his plate on the floor. He said he wasn't afraid of any dog that ever lived, and that he would put the dog's plate on the floor if we would give it to him. Roy said that if Uncle Horatio had fed Muggs on the ground just before the battle, he would have been the first man up Missionary Ridge. Uncle Horatio was furious. "Bring him in! Bring him in now!" he shouted. "I'll feed them on the floor." Roy was all for giving him a chance, but my father wouldn't hear of it. He said that Muggs had already been fed. "I'll feed him again!" bawled Uncle Horatio. We had quite a time quieting him. In his last year, Muggs used to spend practically all of his time outdoors. He didn't like to stay in the house for some reason or other. Perhaps it held too many unpleasant memories for him. Anyway, it was hard to get him to come in, and as a result, the garbage man, the ice man, and the laundry man would not come near our house. We had to haul the garbage down to the corner, take the laundry out and bring it back, and meet the ice man a block from home. After this had gone on for some time, we hit on an ingenious arrangement for getting the dog in the house so that we could lock him up while the gas meter was read and so on. Muggs was afraid of only one thing: an electrical storm. Thunder and lightning frightened him out of his senses. I think he thought a storm had broken the day the mantelpiece fell. He would rush into the house and hide under a bed or in a clothes closet. So we fixed up a thunder machine out of a long, narrow piece of sheet iron with a wooden handle on one end. Mother would shake this vigorously when she wanted to get Muggs into the house. It made an excellent imitation of thunder, but I suppose it was the most roundabout system for running a household that was ever devised. It took a lot out of Mother. A few months before Muggs died, he got to seeing things. He would rise slowly from the floor, growling low, and stalk stiff-legged and menacing toward nothing at all. Sometimes the thing would be just a little to the right or left of a visitor. Once a Fuller brush salesman got hysterics. Muggs came wandering into the room like Hamlet following his father's ghost. His eyes were fixed on a spot just to the left of the Fuller brush man, who stood it until Muggs was about 3 slow, creeping paces from him. Then he shouted. Muggs wavered on past him into the hallway, grumbling to himself, but the Fuller man went on shouting. I think Mother had to throw a pan of cold water on him before he stopped. That was the way she used to stop us boys when we got into fights. Muggs died quite suddenly one night. Mother wanted to bury him in the family lot under a marble stone with some such inscription as "Flights of angels sing thee to thy rest," but we persuaded her it was against the law. In the end, we just put up a smooth board above his grave along a lonely road. On the board I wrote with an indelible pencil, "Cave Canem." Mother was quite pleased with the simple, classic dignity of the old Latin epitaph. The Dog That Bit People by James Thurber. Muggs. I've done all the damage I could do here. Thank you for listening. Countdown musical directors Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel arranged, produced, and performed most of our music. Mr. Ray was on the guitars, the bass, and the drums, and Mr. Chanel handled orchestration and keyboards. It was produced by TKO Brothers. Other music, including some of the Beethoven compositions, were arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. The sports music is the Olbermann theme from ESPN2. It was written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by Nancy Faust, the best baseball stadium organist ever. Our announcer today was my friend Howard Feynman, and everything else was pretty much my fault. That's Countdown for this, the 201st day until the 2024 presidential election. Yes, Saturday, 200 days. Also, the 1200th day since defendant J. Trump's first attempted coup against the democratically elected government of the United States. Use the 14th Amendment and the not regularly given elector objection option. Use the Insurrection Act. Use the justice system in New York and elsewhere. Use the mental health system to stop him from doing it again while we still can. The next scheduled countdown is Tuesday. Bulletins as the news warrants. Until then, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.
In that freezing room, freezing.